Good afternoon from our studio in Amsterdam. Before I introduce our special guest, just some housekeeping for those of you who've never joined before, if you want to pose a question or a comment in the lower right hand or your left hand corner, you'll see comments or question. You can pose it there. There are three emojis that you can use to clap or say something's brilliant or funny. It'll capture that. If you need to send a private message to anyone in the chat area, move your mouse over their name. A window will pop up and you can send a private message. And if you have something really burning to say, there's a microphone next to your name in a circle. If you click on that, I'll get a message that you want to pose a question and join the panel, so your screen is added to the panel. So today we have one of my favorite people, actually one of the only persons I know who completely walked away from her advisory gig because it wasn't aligned with her personal mission and purpose, and she'll talk about that. So Bonnie Lorraine Smith, or Lorraine Smith as she likes to be called, is one of the true superheroes of the sustainability space, and she's going to share her vision of creating an economy in support of life. So Lorraine, if you turn on your video so we can see you, I'll go on mute and you can share your story and your journey, and also explain to us what the hell is materiality.
Wow. Well, thank you, Robert, or Bobby, as I like to call you. And you are also one of my favorite humans. And I just want to begin by thanking you for bringing me here and for doing what you do. I think probably most people in this virtual room realize how you have also been saying and doing things that walk a little bit out of the mainstream, but for way longer than pretty much any of us. So I am very grateful for your constant courage and creating this platform and space for dialogue, and very, very honored to be back here. So thank you. And I guess I'll just say a bit about what I'm doing. And then I really will be very open to questions. And I'll probably leave folks with more questions than answers, but I'll try to at least be useful in some way. I'll begin with my vision because it's what begins every day for me, and also permeates my dreams at night, which is an economy that works in service of life. And what I mean by that is every industry, every needs and wants delivery mechanism, we might call that a company or an organization or a family or a church or a school, every element of human society enables us to live well. It enables us to look after ourselves, each other, our wider web of life that, of course, is what keeps us alive. And it isn't just because companies have cleaned up their pollution, right? Or because boards have become more diverse with gender and ethnicity. It's because creating value, what we might call economic value, is done by serving life. And we're quite far from that right now. My perception of the economy, big hairy beast that it is today, February 16th, 2023, by the calendar I was born into, most of the economy does not work in service of life. It may serve life, but it isn't designed to do that. It's designed to maximize what we call financial wealth. So my vision is an economy that works in service of life, and I have some ideas about what that looks like. And so what I do is I try to learn, well, how would that work? Where is that already happening? Where do we already have existing evidence of that that's perhaps millennia or century or weeks old? Who's doing that? How are they doing it? Why are they doing it? What does it look like? So I try to learn as much as possible about that paradigmatic reality that I think exists. And then I share what I'm finding out. So I write about it. I have a Medium page and I try to put as much as I can out into the world. I not everybody wants to pay $5 a month for an advertising-free platform of voices from around the world, which is what Medium is. So I make the kind of backstage links available, the friend links, if you will. I put out a whole free table of contents for anybody to read anything I'm writing. And then I also do some advisory work, but it's different than what I used to do. And I will say a little bit about what I used to do in just a moment. But I'll stay in the present, which is now I will work one-on-one with individuals who are themselves leaning into that economy and service of life. And I'll offer sparring. I have a sort of methodology to help them get into another mindset to really move into that. And I also do offer advisory services to organizations. We could call those companies, and they may not be. But in that instance, they need to be inviting me in to work with them in this other paradigm. So I am no longer an ESG advisor or sort of corporate sustainability advisor. So let me just say a little bit about what I was doing for the 20 years prior to sort of stepping off this ledge and trying to unfurl my wings, which I officially did in October 2021. It's been an evolution, but that was the moment. It was October 21st, 2021 was the moment where I just knew I don't accept paid work in the field I was in. So for about 2 decades, I was a pretty traditional, if they're short tradition, but traditional sustainability consultant. I was paid to do things like help companies develop their sustainability strategy, their goals. I've done a lot of stakeholder engagement. I speak French, some German and Spanish, and a lot of Portuguese. So I've worked quite a bit in Brazil. So I'd be brought in to do a lot of stakeholder engagement with internal, external stakeholders, building sustainability strategies, mostly with large, mostly publicly traded companies across sectors: forestry, energy, banking, mining, food, a lot of food, ag, some pharma, some tech, etc. And then that evolved because ESG started to become a thing. Really, there became more and more pressure and demand for support in ESG reporting, ESG strategy development. So there's a bit of blur between sustainability and ESG. The way I would describe the distinction is the ESG emphasis really became investor interest. So a particular audience, and I would say that would be mostly investors looking for certain types of disclosures. So I spent a lot of time in the reporting trenches. I feel like I was sort of born into the GRI because my career spans, my career in sustainability and ESG spans the lifetime of the GRI. I remember when the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, were hatched, thinking like, yeah, finally we have this great thing that's going to be so great. And then watching how, in my opinion, they actually sort of reinforced the problem. TCFD, the Trojan horse, we've got it, this will do it, reinforces the problem. I have thoughts about the TNFD, etc. So at a certain point, I just realized this idea for me of trying to make change from within was not succeeding. And so I've decided to step into the paradigm I believe is preferred and invite people to come join me over here. It's probably more than enough to get us going. I'll pause there.
But so I would just want to get back to some of the companies that you work with, because you work with some pretty big companies. These were not like mom and pop shops in mining and energy and food. Can you name some of the companies that you work with, or do you have some NDA that you're not allowed to mention?
Yeah, there's a few I'm probably not meant to say too much, and then some you'd be able to find me because I'm in some of their paperwork here and there. I mean, one of the companies that and by the way, I didn't say anything about Materiality, so I'll come back to that in the right moment. It's funny. Yeah. Well, I was thinking like, so what do I do? And like, I mostly work on Materiality, but I somehow skimmed over that. An example of a company that I worked for, they're kind of easy to talk about because they don't exist now. They've become another company. But I did a lot of work with a company called Fibria. They're one of the world's largest pulp companies based in Brazil. They are now Suzano, which is an even larger pulp company, still based in Brazil. And the nature of my work for the forest products company that was Fibria was two layers. And I think these are important layers because they really informed me. One layer was helping them engage with different stakeholders. So for instance, in the forest products world, it's basically plantation, right? They grow the same tree over and over and over. There's a lot I could say about the Brazilian forest industry that is surprising to the person on the street. But anyway, my role, in a good way, my role was to help enable dialogue to flow from community members, from scientists. They were, for example, looking at GMO trees. And there's a lot of reasons that that's exciting. There's a lot of reasons that that's very problematic. So I facilitated some of the dialogue around GMO trees. So a lot of kind of not grassroots, but in the trenches work within the company. And that would be exemplary of the type of work I did with other companies as well. Some, let's say, fast casual restaurant businesses in the US, couple large media companies. There are a few I sort of really can't say who, which is part of the thing that bugs me about ESG is that it's all very cloak and dagger and confidential. But let me say the other thing that was really useful with Fibria was I was on their advisory board. So a lot of companies, a lot of large publicly traded companies have sustainability advisory boards or some version of an external stakeholder group that meets perhaps several times a year with the idea of taking a look at a company's sustainability and wider strategy and providing feedback. I have both facilitated those groups. So I facilitated that group on behalf of Keurig, the used to be Green Mountain Coffee Roasters. Now it's Keurig, the coffee makers. I facilitated dialogue such as those advisory boards for a number of companies. And then with Fibria, I was a board member, an advisory board member, not the board of directors, but advisory board. And I was the only non-Brazilian on the board. It helps that I speak Portuguese, so that's part of how I was there. And that was a tremendous opportunity to hear. It was chair and CEO led. So 4 times a year, we sat with the CEO of the company, the chair of the company. We went on site into their plantations. We met with their community members. It was very hands-on. It was quite, I would say, quite beautifully choreographed. And in an ironic way, I would say that's one of the reasons I knew I needed to go, because even the most engaged, committed executives who invested in these conversations, they were real. There were what I would call very meaningful conversations in all directions. It was not just the execs lecturing the stakeholders and they each got a few minutes to speak, which is often how it goes. In spite of that, they are, the reason the advisory board ended was because the company was acquired. And poof, everything we were doing ground to a halt. Now, Suzano has carried on a lot of that work. And I know personally a number of the people who were there who came across from Fibria or who were already there. So in many ways, a lot of amazing things continue. I'll just share an example. I won't name the name, but let's just say it's one of the largest banks in the US. I was the head of their ESG reporting team. So I was part of an external agency that was brought in each year to do their ESG reporting. The name of the company doesn't really matter because, to be honest, it's very similar to their other large banking peers in the US. But let's say if you're walking through the streets of New York, where I lived for 10 years before moving here to Montreal, you'd see their retail stuff pretty regularly. And what I found there, so what I was doing there was leading their ESG reporting, which, by the way, the first year I helped, which I think was 2016, it was their citizenship report. And what I find indicative here was there was a moment it was about the third report. I think the years blur a little bit, but it wasn't the first, it wasn't the last that I worked on, where we were about a week away from publishing when we changed the name of the report from the citizenship report to the ESG report. It was the same report. It was the exact same report. It was a find and replace on the word citizenship for ESG. And I found that both understandable, like it was a public affairs decision, and public affairs make decisions about how they message, whom they reach, and why. It's not my decision to make. On behalf of the future I'd like to live in, I would like to be in a place where it isn't just a word swap. It's an action swap. And it isn't just a messaging challenge. It's a business model challenge. And so that was another little clue. I'm slow to catch on. It took me another 100 or so clues to be like, wait a minute, this doesn't really change how value is created. Yeah. Let me tell you one other company, and I might get in trouble for saying this, but boy, if I get in trouble for saying things out loud about a coal company, something tells me a few friends will rally to cheer me up. I was on, again, with an agency brought in to do the first sustainability report, or I forget what they called it, report for this company called Alpha. There might be another bit to their name. This goes a few years back, so it's blurry in my mind. And the reason they were reporting was they had recently killed a dozen or so of their employees in a mining incident. I tend to avoid the word accident because these are preventable tragedies. They're not accidents. A little bit like road fatalities. We know the laws of physics, and then we know what happens when we breach them. So I don't think of those as accidents. And we were brought in to do their first report because they had recently been, let's say, restructured, and they were experiencing increased scrutiny due to having killed some of their staff in a very preventable tragedy. And in many ways, again, I felt very encouraged and heartened. The people behind the work we were doing were very committed to safety. We talked with the executives who spoke to the widows, right? Like these were people who were, personally engaged in doing what they could to make things right, to change the way the company functioned, to change the way coal was mined. And it was easy to be soothed by that attitude, to be reassured. All right, they see the problem. They understand this can't go on. They want to be super transparent. So the report we wrote was very, I would say it was actually very transparent. But as I thought about it, I realized, well, yeah, they want to be very transparent about how they don't want to kill more employees in mining incidents, like collapsed tunnels. But they're not ready, at least not outwardly in a way I could perceive, and certainly not in a way we could report on, to say, and there's an end to this kind of employment, and there's a way more beautiful form of earning and creating energy and value than this. And so I look back on that as a great learning experience. It kind of shake my head and realize, yeah, that needed to end. I don't know what they're doing now. I haven't kept in touch.
Before we unwrap some of the things I'd like to get to, explain to those listening, what do you mean by materiality?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to assume a basic level of ESG exposure, probably much more than a basic level in this group. But if there's jargon or things I'm saying that merit greater clarity, please drop questions into the chat and I'll explain more. So a lot of consultants, like I was, would be brought in to conduct what's called a materiality assessment. The object of the game was such an assessment, which, by the way, could run the prices I saw going to the agency doing it, not to this one, would be anywhere from 40 to 150,000 US to do this assessment. So not nothing, not game-changing billions, but not nothing in the land of, retirement lunches or other expenses. And what we would do with the materiality assessment is look at a company's everything, all their disclosures, all of their stakeholder input. We would perhaps gather more stakeholder input to identify their list of material issues. A material issue might be human rights. It might be conflict minerals. It might be climate change. It might be a bunch of things. And then we would help organize that information so that they could include it in their reporting. I came to see, having been involved in numerous materiality assessments, dozens, either as the consultant paid to help conduct the assessment or as a stakeholder engaged to provide input on an assessment being conducted by another, that a couple things were missing from the equation. First, these were very opaque. They were very non-transparent. So the final assessment would go out into the world in the company's report. It would just be a page with either a list or a matrix of issues. And the matrix is hilarious because it kind of ranks and positions issues in relation to one another. And I would say that is not value and time well spent to pit human rights against climate change, right? Or to say, conflict minerals are more important to external stakeholders than they are to the impacts on the business. Like, that might be an interesting exercise to have with some of your staff over lunch, but that is not strategic to put out into the world and say, this is how we make decisions around here. And by the way, the person looking at these public disclosures just sees the results. What is the short list of issues and how do we kind of organize them? We don't see, how did you come up with that? What did stakeholders actually say? Why are they concerned about those issues? And we definitely don't see, ever. And if this is wrong, by the way, I would love to see examples of this. So if you've seen an example that contradicts what I'm about to say, please send it and even publicly shame me for not knowing about it. We do not see the company saying, oh, and by the way, this is how our business model is dependent on these issues perpetuating. So, for example, human rights might come up, and it would often come up in the context of a company's supply chain. Let's say they're in food and agriculture. Let's say they're largely sourcing from the global south. And let's say they're imposing a monocrop, heavily agrotoxified way of producing onto folks who may not have a lot of choice in terms of how they do or don't engage with this company if they want to play ball. So there are some human rights issues connected to that. And that's the business model of the company, is make the most same stuff as cheaply as possible. Oh, and there might be some people involved. So there's lots more I could critique about materiality. But what I decided, having been involved in it over and over, was, well, what would happen if I did it the way I think it should be done? I spent a lot of time internally within these projects complaining. And then there came a point where I was like, complaining is only useful if it changes something. And if it doesn't, it's just generating bile. It's not really helpful in any way. So I asked myself, what would I do if I were in charge of the materiality universe and I could do whatever I wanted? And I said out loud to a colleague with whom I'd done a lot of materiality work, who was at that big bank, I said, you know what I would do, Elizabeth? I would put reality in materiality. And she was like, you should do that. And so I did. So I hatched a methodology called Materiality. It sounds the same, but there's an E instead of an I. And the principles of materiality, the way I go about it, are as follows. There's 4 I'll touch on. And by the way, I've written quite extensively about this, so I can drop some more direct links into the chat in a moment. But the first intention of materiality, the reason we would do it, is to inform strategy, to actually inform different actions of the company. Whereas right now, I tell you, materiality is done to figure out what do we put in the report, which is kind of lame. The second thing is, with the materiality that I look at, it is based on public disclosures of the company. So even if there's all kinds of interesting analysis in the background, if we can't see it, we can't experience what this company is doing, it doesn't work. So materiality looks at what is public. And there's a very specific reason. I want to be very clear on this because I think I get miscast sometimes. I am not interested in sticking it to the man. I'm not trying to take anybody down. This isn't a gotcha or a kind of whistleblowing exercise for me. And I respect the gotchas and the whistleblowing and the other things that happen. I genuinely do, but that's not what I'm doing. I interpret companies, especially big companies, which is where my experience and appetite lies, as part of the commons. They are literally part of the air we breathe, the water we drink, the cities we move through. All of our interconnected society is deeply affected by large companies, more by some than others, but they are in the commons. And so with that perception, I suggest their impacts and expressions need to be more transparently in the commons, not filtered through what their legal counsel signed off on. And I have an uncomfortable set of anecdotes in my back pocket of what legal counsel will and won't sign off on. So materiality, as I see it, is an expression of a company, which is part of the commons, into the commons. Of course, it's still just an expression. It's open for interpretation, but it ought to be more common. I think a key piece of materiality that is entirely absent from the corporate version that I've done, it's weird that this is absent, but it is absent, is we are holding a lens of the future we want. And I'm quite particular about this. This isn't a lens of the SDGs. I'm going to wholly set them aside. We can come back to them if folks want, but I'm not talking about that. I am talking about an economy that works in service of life. Try to find that in the SDGs. I am talking about every economic entity enabling me to thrive and enabling us to thrive and enabling the world that keeps us alive thriving. With that future in mind, what is material to this company? How is their current stated purpose connected to how they earn money? And how is that connected to the future where an economy serves life? Materiality is looking for that. It's asking, how's that going? So concrete example, the first assessment I did, which I published on April Fool's Day last year, was on Google, one of the largest companies in the world, Google Alphabet. And I looked at their purpose, which is very clear and easy to find. It's making all of the world's data accessible to everyone. I like that purpose. It's actually very aligned with materiality. The thing is, the way they make money is they sell advertising. And in 2021, which was the financial year I assessed, they made something like $158 billion US. That was 2021, which was not a financially comfortable year for a lot of human beings on the planet. It was a less comfortable year for many. It was also a devastating year for a whole bunch of humans and a lot of others. And Google kind of made out like bandits by mostly selling advertising. They do have other revenue streams, but the vast majority is selling advertising. You could say, well, that's how they make their data accessible. I'm sorry, but that is a different purpose. If I ask any 12-year-old walking down the street, is there a difference between making data accessible and selling advertising? And it was just a yes/no question. I'm pretty sure people would say yes. And by the way, in this assessment, which is totally public, everything about materiality is transparent. So I'll just say one more thing in just a sec about it. But you can see the evolution of the company's business model. When it began, it was very true to that purpose. And they lived and breathed making that true. But as they grew and as the existing economic model slurped them into itself, they became like the rest, which is purpose to maximize profit. And the way they do that is by selling advertising. So the fourth principle of materiality, and again, I've written all this up, it's very public and there to be kicked at, is working out loud. So I see these assessments. I'm doing materiality assessments. I'm just doing them. Nobody's funding me to do it. I'm doing it because I think it's worth doing. I'm applying this methodology, which I created, but it's kind of there for anybody to do different things with, and it's ever evolving. And so the fourth principle is I work out loud. I work with my garage door open virtually. Anybody can see what I'm doing, as in like they can see the slide deck as it emerges. And the final result is public. I did a second one on TD Bank. That's one of Canada's largest banks. I published it on Canada Day last year, July 1st, 2022. Things that pop from that, for example, they've got all kinds of great material on their sustainable finance. But when you actually compare their annual report from 10 years ago to the one of the fiscal year I was looking at, they've doubled their lending to fossil fuels. So they've got reams and reams of material on what they're doing in sustainable finance. But when you actually compare the numbers, they're investing more in fossil fuels. So let's just be real about what's happening. In November, I released another assessment on Danone, global food company, that talks a lot about regenerative agriculture, which I have a lot of time for. But when you go into the details of their assessment, we see that what they're calling regenerative is actually still quite degenerative for the most part. And here's another little concrete nugget from the Danone assessment, which is where reality needs to happen. So, like, hold this thought. Danone is proud of their 84% recycled packaging figure. This is prominent in their kind of snapshot of who we are and what we do. And again, this is all very bundled up in an assessment, and I'll drop the links in so they're easy to find. 84% recycling, 84% recyclable, reusable, or compostable for their packaging. And Danone, of course, produces a lot of single-use packaging for their yogurts and other consumable foods. So I took public information. It's all public because that's an important part of materiality, because we're in the commons. We exist in the commons together. And I compared their recycling data with where they are the first, second, or third market share brand based on their data. So I'm trusting they've done the numbers and they know where their first, second, or third market share brand in the regions where they sell. And then I went to the OECD waste management data, which is also public. All of this is footnoted and linked in the assessment, which is public. And I compared the recycling rates in those regions. And for their 84% recyclable, reusable, or compostable packaging, which, by the way, means 16% is going to landfill guaranteed when it leaves their back door, which they know. And that's a crap ton of waste from one of the world's biggest companies. But let's just say, okay, we can live with 16%, even though we can't because it's killing us. Then we actually go to the data and we see that in most of the regions where they're the largest or in the largest market share, recycling rates are in some cases, like in the US, below 5%. The majority is either landfilled or incinerated. The best region was still under 20% recycled. So Danone, I love you. And 84% doesn't mean anything if it's not real, if it's not actually happening. So when we take a materiality lens to this world we live in and we imagine an economy that works in service of life, never in a billion years would we sign off on a program that says we're 84% recyclable when actually we're vast majority littered, incinerated, landfilled, and we keep producing it because it's only good once. That's the reality we're in. And I hold a vision where we're way smarter than that. And we find ways to nourish and support one another without that. That's materiality. I see lots of questions. Should I start answering questions, or what do you think, Bobby?
I want to pose a question to you. So,
of course,
you are either now a drug dealer or a secret billionaire because you basically fired all of your clients. You fired all of your clients. You spoke of having a tip jar that people can give you, a tip for helping them. So you basically only want to work with people that you could marry. Fundamentally.
Is it what question do you want me to answer in there?
You could roll it all into one. I mean, it's you've set the bar really high. And I know that you're very tough on yourself. I remember asking you, why do you do all these ultra marathons of 100 kilometers? And you say, well, I'm asking companies to do hard things, and I want to know what it feels like to do something hard, which that was the most incredible answer I've ever heard. So I admire your authenticity and, being the George Carlin of the ESG measurement space. So, this is quite a dramatic. I don't know too many consultants. They just want to write hours, basically. That's their mantra. They don't really care as long as they can write hours. So you've taken a really radical stance.
Yeah. Well, okay, thank you. I'll share a bit. So I sometimes get asked, well, what's your business model? And I want to offer something a bit dark first, and then I'll lighten it up. I I think sometimes, especially in a talk like this, like I love having these conversations. I love you, Bobby. I love the people you bring together, and I feel like honored and inspired, and my spirit really lights up in these conversations. So I think I honestly and genuinely give the impression that I'm having a lot of fun and this works and I get it and I can see it, and I'm on a trail, and my stride is light and my load is light and I'm on it. And that's true. But anybody who spends a bit of time with me, like not in these conversations, knows that I have some very dark times. I have a lot of precarity financially and structurally. I don't have a boss. I am on my own. I actually moved into this apartment. In fact, the same moment that I knew, October 21st, 2021, that I was no longer going to accept that kind of paid consulting work. And I know the moment because it was when I put my hand on my doorknob after completing a 5-day run. I'll say a little bit more about that. But it was also the same moment that I knew I was going to move, because I was living in a really beautiful place that I came to quite serendipitously, having moved to Montreal from Manhattan, where apartments feel free by comparison, right? If you've ever lived in Manhattan, then you move somewhere else, suddenly everything's free.
Yeah.
But after living there for a little bit, I realized, it's actually not free by Montreal standards, and I could do a little better as I'm stepping off this financial ledge. So I am not pretending that this is easy and anybody can do it and my life is all roses and, it's a barrel of laughs. And I will say now, how do I do what I do? What is my business model? And I would also declare quite honestly, again, that I don't think this is optional for me. This isn't like, so this is where I'm at. I think of my business model as essentially that of an artist, in the sense that I am applying skills that I've been honing over many, many years. In some areas, I'm actually quite expert. Like I know a weird amount about ESG reporting, a very niche, jargon-filled minefield. I have a lot of skills in that area. I also have a lot of experience having gone backstage with large companies in different sectors, sometimes in different parts of the same industry vertical, in different languages, in different parts of the world, in the plantation, in the factory, in the boardroom, in the design shop, in the foundry. Like, I love foundries. I don't understand why we don't all spend more time in foundries. So I have a kind of inclination to be involved in industry. That is my medium. That's my paint or my clay. And then I use that medium and these skills and this vision, this idea, to express and put into the public square what I feel needs expressing. And I guess I would say I'm not a fine artist. I'm more of a folk artist. And so there are elements of my art that are not polished, that people may just sort of go, ouch, cringe, that slide needs a bit of a redesign. To which I say, hey, great, if you've got time, it's public, you can download it, redesign it, and please send it back to me. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going because I got more to say, more to express. So I keep my lights on a couple ways. The way that I have the most fun doing, actually, that feels most natural to me, is almost as like a public correspondent. So my Medium page is sort of like the letters that I'm writing to the world. And I turned the meter on about a year ago. I didn't even know there was a meter, and I turned the meter on. So the more people who read and share my work, the more I get paid. Right now, that is a tiny amount. I like to say I pay a bill with that, as opposed to I pay my bills, plural, with that. But I'm hopeful that over time, people will find what I'm putting there to be useful. I try to parse this materiality work, parse examples, be as concrete and as inspirational as I can. And I also, actually, this is possibly more useful for folks, is every Friday on Medium, I publish what I've been up to the week before. So I try to be really specific around, like, how am I spending my time? What am I reading? What am I writing? And what am I doing? And anybody who's paying close attention will see, like, it ebbs and flows. Sometimes I'm like, whoa, what am I doing? And sometimes I'm like, bang, bang, bang. I got a bunch of interviews done for Materiality, which are all transparent. Anybody can see them. I see a few people here. Hey, Thomas, who've actually been interviewed for assessments, and our conversations are available. So good to see people. And then I do get invited to speak and sort of motivate and provoke in different organizational contexts. And if it is corporate, I'm not the cheapest date in town, because I feel like, if you want me to really come and tell you the truth, I will, but you got to pay me. And then one-on-one, I do coaching. I have a small number of clients who are crazy enough to work with me. I have a methodology. One of the things that's really important to me is listening to non-humans. I think we are overly concerned with what we think, and we've missed that we have instructions and guidance and inspiration and support all around us. It just doesn't always look and sound like us. And that's been one of my most important learnings, is how much I've already got teachers all around me. And I have ways of kind of encouraging folks to experience that for themselves, as well as to just help identify, well, what is the world you want to be in? And what do you want your role to be in that? Because we each have different roles. And then lastly, I'd say I'm staying open to there being boards and C-suite folks who are crazy enough to engage me in the way that I would truly work. And that would be with the materiality lens. So looking at, what do you say your purpose is, what do you actually do, and what's the difference? What does the world need from you? Which might be to dissolve yourselves, right? It might be to take yourselves apart and repurpose the assets that are beautiful and elegant and belong in this future, and let go the ones that are actually holding us back, causing us harm, bringing us to a place of resistance or kind of spiritual inflammation. So far, it's the individuals and the speaking and the writing that's keeping me busy, but I'm really open to some of those senior industrial decision makers coming to me within the context, not privately off to the side, but within the context of their industrial structures, to say, we're ready to think in those terms.
So they have to be all in.
Well, or they have to be willing to listen. I'll push back a bit on the all-in thing, because one of the things I'm learning, and I should have said yes, and I do have a tip jar which sits in different places. And people, I'm always curious. It's really been interesting to put that out there. Actually, I didn't think I would, and I did, and it's been great. It's actually really helped in a number of instances. So thank you to those who've contributed. But on the all-in thing, I want to offer another way of looking at that. So I don't disagree, but I feel differently about it, which is, none of us in this moment necessarily has an answer. So it's difficult to say you need to be all in to something that you don't know what it is. What I would say is you need to be all open, all receptive, with an intention. So for me, my intention is to shift towards the economy that works in service of life. That could be expressed in lots of different ways. What I've noticed with corporate purpose is there's still a very deep entrenchment of looking at purpose as the company figuring out what it does. And, there's nothing wrong with that. But as long as it's within the company, it's still in old school materiality. It's in old school, the business of business is business. What does it look like when the company says, we want to understand our purpose, which we may need to evolve in the context of an economy that works in service of life? There, I would say they need to be all open, because we may just not have a clue. What does that even look like? And that's a big, big, big question. So I see lots of questions, and I definitely want to touch on some of them. I want to offer you a little passageway that touches on something you said earlier, Bobby. So I'm jamming a lot in here. Thank you for letting me do it. Just yesterday, I actually published something, coincidentally, but nothing's random, I guess, on a 5-day run I did, this run that ended with me putting my hand on my doorknob and saying, I need to stop taking corporate work, and I need to move. But there's a lot more to it. It was 5 days. It was 255 kilometers, more than a marathon a day. So that sounds like, oh my God, she's some kind of crazy runner, and that's nuts. And
You are.
well, but actually, my thesis with this article is that I believe as ordinary people, we can and must and will do extraordinary things. And if you could meet me in real life, and if you could meet the real runners, I know like the serious, elite, hardcore other species runners, you would go, oh, I see what you mean now. You really aren't one of them. I'm not being modest. I'm telling you the truth. But I did do something extraordinary, and I did it. And how did I do it? Because I really am kind of ordinary. There were 4 things I had to do it. And I think this relates to every extraordinary thing we are doing and we will do. And it may be tiny and invisible and nobody will ever know. And it may be all over Instagram and you make millions doing it, and everything in between. That doesn't matter. The intention matters, and that we do it matters. For me, the number one thing that I realized, I sort of look back, I was like, I haven't said much about this run. It comes up, you tease me about it, and I've done a few other runs here and there. But I was like, well, there's something really useful in it. I'd like to pull it up and share it, because it's become a little handbook for me of doing extraordinary. And I'm trying to push through 2 more materiality assessments, one on JBS, the world's largest meat company, the other on Glencore, one of the largest mining companies. They're kind of blowing my head up a bit, and trying to do these unpaid, sprinting on them and trying to do a few other things has been nuts. So then I was like, well, how do I do extraordinary things again? Let me remember. Oh yeah. I start by inviting extraordinary into the room. What would it be like if, what if I what if I put out 2 publicly available resources on 2 of the largest companies in the world that helped anyone who was curious, including the chairman of the board of those companies or my mother, to see what is currently stated as their purpose and how they make money, and what the world would like from these incredible pools of assets and resource and capacity to deliver on the economy that works in service of life. What would that be like? Let me just invite a sense of that extraordinary possibility into my world, and treat it well. Hey, extraordinary, come on in. What can I get for you? Just that invitation makes it possible. And without the invitation, it's not even words uttered, right? Much less actions completed. And once I've made that invitation and extraordinary shows up and is like, well, I'm going to need to do a few things around here, then I go into the second piece, which is planning. And planning sounds boring, but I actually find it really exciting, because you can go, well, I'm not there, but there are some things I can do to get there. And that might involve asking for help. It might involve adjusting timelines. It's going to involve all kinds of things. When I did that 5-day run, it was a planning span of 8 months for 5 days. So planning for extraordinary is so basic, but it makes so much possible. And another key piece that I realized is, because I'm ordinary and I'm missing a lot to deliver on extraordinary, I need to imitate extraordinary people, which may be non-humans as well. And I say a lot more about that because I've got to learn from others. I don't know how to do a lot of things. So with the materiality, with running for 5 days, with anything that's extraordinary, I need to look to other analogs or people who've quite simply done it before. People, and again, they may not be human people. And that's been really informative. I basically just copy anytime I've done something that I'm really, really proud of, I look and go, well, I kind of just copied somebody else who did it better before, and I'm still learning. And I think the final piece for me, this one's really tough, actually, maybe because I'm female, I don't know, but I find I need to listen to my critics, but not too much, because critics bring rigor, right? They highlight risks, they test my resolve, they'll make me have to prove. And they may have really good points that might make me safer on a 5-day run, or might make my idea stronger or more findable or more visible or more sound. But at a certain point, critics can just crush your soul. And that involves inner critics too, right? I have a few that live here pretty full time. So how can I listen to them, honor them, thank you for your feedback, but not allow them to crush my soul? Because I'm busy serving extraordinary who's come on over for lunch again, and she needs a few things. So I just wrote a piece about how to be ordinary and do extraordinary things. And I use my 5-day run as a kind of template because it was easy, honestly. And also because it really gave me that handbook, but I think it applies to lots of other stuff. Yeah, there's cool questions here. Should I start?
Yes, I wanted to take. Ben had asked for the mic, but I want to take a couple of the questions before I give Ben the mic.
Sure.
So Manuel wanted to know. It's a business model challenge. Mostly all executives we work with consider sustainability a cost center and ESG a cost of doing business. How can we change the reality and the mindset?
Yeah, it's a great question, Manuel. I mean, one way I could answer this is to say, I couldn't, so I quit. I don't know if that helps. I would say a couple things. One is I've learned I can't convince anybody of anything. I really can't. And as soon as I find myself like, if I could just say it this way, they'll believe me, they'll get me, they'll know I'm right and they're wrong. That kind of like spiritual opposition, A, is exhausting, and B, unless I have control and authority over them, which, I mean, even my cat, I don't have control or authority over much. It's not going to work. So if my starting premise, and I say this with respect, I don't mean this to critique, but maybe to offer where I've gone instead. If my opening premise is how can I convince them to, then that's the end of my sentence. And I rewind and I look for another way. And I so far have found two other ways. And that's essentially what I'm applying in what I do now. One way is I just stop. I just end that conversation as lovingly and respectfully as I can. And I maybe even end that relationship. And maybe some people will hear this because this is going to be recorded. And there may be people that I used to work with who may be like, oh, that's why we don't hear from her anymore, with love. My work is as done as it can be there. And maybe my silence is the best use of this engagement. I have another more proactive or active form, and that is what materiality with an E is for me. And there might be another version for you, which is I just keep telling the truth. Right? So in Canada, we talk a lot about truth and reconciliation to try to make right some of the atrocities that have become the structural norm in this country. And one of the things I point out in that conversation, which I participate in different ways, is, we can't skip the truth part and go straight to reconciliation. Because if we don't truly understand what happened, not just like, oh yeah, some bad things happened, and I'll be slightly morbid for a moment in the spirit of sharing truth. May 2021, global headlines were made at the very tragic discovery of 215 buried Indigenous children in unmarked graves in what had been a school in Western Canada. And I was getting messages from friends around the world going, oh my God, we're so sorry. That's so sad. How could that even happen? And all those poor families and those poor children. And what I found really disturbing was that was a headline. First of all, it was known more than a decade ago, so that it finally made news is just bizarre. That one incident. But second of all, that one incident is not isolated. It is a structural norm. We have an apartheid racist regime here. I'm not exaggerating. I'm just telling the truth. But you can grow up in this country and not know that. So that headline is like, oh my God, dead children. Okay. If we can't tell that truth, if that's like, oh, she seems a bit twitchy on the Indigenous file, we can't reconcile. So if we can't tell the truth about how industry shows up in society and the effect that has on human beings and our wider biosphere, we can't fix ESG. Right? We're going to just keep standing on that scale and going, oh my God, I'm still 180 pounds overweight. Oh my God, I'm still 180 pounds overweight. If we don't understand that everything we're jamming into our bodies is making us sick, we haven't understood the truth. So we don't need to fix the scale. I'm swinging to a gentler metaphor now away from genocide. We don't need to fix the scale. we need to hear the truth. I hope that helps, Manuel. I see your title in your profile, and you're probably not in an easy spot, but I would just encourage you to encourage. The word courage lives in there. Just have the courage to tell the truth as best you can. Even just ask about it versus tell it.
Jen wanted to know, taking your excellent example of Danone, how would you convince a large company like Danone that can get rid of that 16% that goes to landfill?
Yeah, well, spoiler alert, I guess, for my previous answers, I can't convince anyone of anything. I have heard that folks at Danone have looked at the deck. And I'm not doing a good job of multitasking and dropping things in. So, Bobby, after this, I'll do a quick little run of links that reference all the things I've talked about here. Mm-hmm. But here's what I'm in charge of the universe all of a sudden, just temporarily. And the folks who make decisions and allocate assets and resources at Danone have asked me what to do tomorrow. I guide them to phase out any single-use packaging in their value web, period. That is a complete contortion for their current business model. But we are killing ourselves, literally, and not just our human selves, to increase recycling rates. And aside from the fact that they're not increasing, we don't want to increase recycling rates. We want to decrease things that we throw out, period. And the way we do that is we stop making them. And we're very smart people. We're very, very, remember, we get to invite extraordinary. Extraordinary is walking down the path here. And I don't say road, because that means asphalt, which kills stuff. There's extraordinaries walking right by. Like, invite her in. She's available at any given moment, 100% of the time, 24/7, everywhere. Kind of like Google wants its data to be. Extraordinary is already there. Invite her in and say, how could we get really healthy food to people without them having to throw something out after? And the first thing she'll do is kind of laugh, because she's a bit derisive sometimes, and say, that's how we used to do it, right? And we're still capable. So let's get over the sort of modern dilemma and remember what we're capable of. And now, I just lost my title as in charge of the universe. So now Danone has to do something with their reality. I'm not sure how they do it, but if they have the intention to serve life, and by the way, their purpose is something like making more people healthy through food.
Yeah.
So if you just strip that down and say their purpose is to make people healthy, it's not to increase recycling rates, which aren't happening and don't make people healthy. So stop trying to do the thing that isn't living your purpose and do the thing that lives your purpose. What would that look like? What would you have to leave behind and pick up? Probably not easy. I'm not, by the way, I mentioned I have my dark times and precarious moments. That would be true for executives who take this on, right? Like, holy crap. Every single dollar we made last quarter undermined the ability of life to thrive in some way. And we didn't even ask that question, right? Oh my God, I've been such a fool. I've been drinking myself silly every night and not listening to my wife or whatever. Like, those are really painful realizations, but they're possibly true. And so you make the change.
I'm going to see if Ben still wants to join, pose his question. It was a while ago. Yeah. Okay. Ben, you're on.
I just actually, I don't know if I have so many questions, but I just really wanted to
get half a question.
Okay. So I just wanted to thank you. I've been doing this work for a long time, and I've been saying the same kinds of things that you're saying. When SASB came out with their materiality assessment, how they categorized everything, and now I understand from what you're saying why I glazed over, because I didn't feel it was true. Especially the things that they discounted, what wasn't immaterial in certain situations. So, thank you so much. I also just wanted to mention that in another session, Robert, I met Martin. I'm not sure how to pronounce Vierhofer, I think is his
Vierhofer,
with PI. I just think that there are people like Martin out there that you could partner with. He is proving that the management that is consistent in their goals, that really are looking for sustainability consistently, and they're using natural language processing to see the consistency, which is very limited. But there are other groups. Maybe he's not using that. There's another group called Stock Snips that's using natural language processing. In both cases, proving that the people that are consistently doing stuff that's good for ESG have tremendous alpha. In other words, they make money. And I think once that message gets out, people like you are going to be, people will want your information. But I think you're making it too easy to say that it's too complicated, or it's too, they don't know what to do. I think they do know what to do a lot of the time.
Well, may I offer some commentary on that? And thank you very much for your kind feedback. It's nice to be heard. I want to get really pointy for a moment on ESG, because I kind of just skipped over, like, I used to be involved in that. No, I don't do that anymore. But I want to be very clear that I actually don't believe in the connection between ESG and alpha, as long as we're talking about ESG the way we mostly are. And I see that because I've been the pen holder for ESG disclosures and been in the, I guess, privileged position of seeing what preceded the pen and what comes out when it goes public. And it is my honest perception that almost none, I'm going to say none, but somewhere in my mind, I'm like, there must be some. I could scratch around and find something. So almost none of the ESG data that I was personally responsible for, would I say, is actually connected to an economy and service of life. It may, and often was, connected to harm reduction. It may have been connected to slowing the damage,
right,
which is kind of a different thing from harm reduction, but related. Nowhere was it related to reimagining a business model so that it serves life. And without that, I would go so far as to say, I won't say that it's useless, but I'll tell you the one use it has, in this grumpy old lady's opinion. The one use it has is its good housekeeping. In other words, it's useful to organize data, to collect and figure out what's going on. Every now and then I reshelve my books. I take them off. I'm like, oh, I'm ready to give these ones to thrift. I got to dust these ones. Oh my gosh, I read this one. I want to give it to my friend Sally. That's not useless, but it's not the same as reading all the books and absorbing the knowledge, right? I'm just organizing them. I'm housekeeping, because sometimes that's good to do. So with deep respect, and we haven't met, we're strangers connecting on a virtual platform. I feel strongly that we are wasting brilliance and the potential for extraordinariness by pumping even debate into ESG. Because even some of the debate, people send me, I get easily 5 to a dozen links a day by friends and strangers who see what I'm saying. They're like, oh yeah, check this out. And it'll be an article critiquing ESG. And frankly, no offense and thank you to some who are sending them, but please stop sending them, because I don't read them anymore, because I look and I'm like, it's like debating whether or not Republicans are better or worse than Democrats, when I look and go, a two-party system in this kooky thing we call a nation state, in a clearly money infiltrated political system, is not worth my debate. What is worth my debate is, like, how many neighbors can I support in getting their worm composters going? That's useful. That's a really good use of my time. And maybe I take that expertise and I work with my friends who are in the municipal space and I talk to them about policy around composting. But getting pulled into some kind of media fracas about if only the Republicans weren't or were is like, not bringing us closer to supporting each other and enabling life to thrive. So that's one person's point of view. I ghost the ESG creates alpha story because I think it's the wrong thread. That's a very spiky thing to say to a generous stranger. I thank you for hearing comments.
I appreciate what you're saying very much. I just do, we're in a transition. We have to make a transition. And when people like you talk about reality being part of materiality, that's what would make ESG significant. And that's what actually these Martin at least is finding out on whatever scale he is that the people that are actually pragmatic and putting strategies into place because they're consistently concerned about sustainability, those are the ones that are getting the alpha.
Yeah. Well,
alpha just simply means that people are buying it.
Yeah.
And they're buying it because it's good for them.
Because
I'm going to have to start wrapping up because we're coming down toward the end, and I'm cognizant of the next 100 miles you have to run this afternoon. What can this audience do to help you, apart from the tip jar?
Sure. Well, I'll let my ego speak for just a moment. If folks would like to learn more about what I'm saying and doing, the easiest and most rewarding way for me is to follow me and clap for my work on Medium, share the ideas there. I try to organize it as effectively as possible so that you can find very specific things like career-oriented things versus technical materiality stuff, etc. If anybody's having trouble finding things, let me know. Thank you, Carolyn. That's very heartwarming. Read my stuff and share it and comment. Tell me what you disagree with. Help me see better. Help me hear into channels and spaces I can't hear naturally without your help.
Can we take up a collection for running shoes, maybe?
That's funny. That is actually my third highest expense after rent and food. There is a tip jar there. So if you feel inclined, if I've helped you in some way and you want to kick in some loose change, and then if you or someone you know are an individual or within an organization that would benefit from this kind of reality checking, and I can help guide you there, then I'd be open to being an advisor. Thanks, Beata. Well, so in some ways we have joined forces. So I will say this may be a funny way to close, Bobby, but you humor me and I'm grateful. I love connecting with people. I'm teased that my spirit animal is mycelium or fungus, because I am sort of I see and feel connections everywhere, and I'm really aware of how interconnected we all are. It kind of buoys me and keeps me alive. And if there's one thing I've learned going hyper independent in these last 18 months is I really am only one person. Although I try to live in the paradigm I want to be in, my landlady expects fiat currency, and I need to focus. And I need to focus on as few things as I can to do them as well as I can. So I have this paradox of loving being connected and staying connected in all directions, giving, receiving, and also really needing to earmark time and not be everyone's pen pal, much as I love it. So I am very grateful to be connected with a number of you. I've had a great chance to connect more. I am in awe and admiration, and I'm a pretty slow correspondent unless we really are shoving each other forward faster in our own, towards our own purposes. So yeah, I guess I'd say if folks feel like there's something I can do to help, I'm listening and loving hearing. And otherwise, I'm more just grateful that we've had this moment, and excited about what comes next. We've got some pretty extraordinary work to do, and I feel like we're really lucky to get to do it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorraine, because this was a brilliant talk. Actually, hardly anybody left. I think they can go on for a long time, but this is the first time that I actually got through to 3 mega investors that are interested in investing in service of life.
Oh,
And
wow. Send them a link to my tip jar.
And I have to jump on one call. So we'll do a short round of virtual happy hour. But I'd like to make a group selfie to prove that we were actually doing something today. Just wave to the camera. It'll make a photo of you, and then it will collate all of the photos of everyone, and then I'll send you a postcard with all of the photos of everyone on there. So just, do that. And I want to thank Lorraine. She was, as always, absolutely brilliant and very inspiring. I want to thank also our entire production crew for making this webinar possible. Sam, our producer, crypto genius and ramen critic, Ricky, my absolute better half with no filter, Xi Jinping, my head of transparency and integrity, Vladimir Putin, our head of conflict resolution, Jeff Bezos, our human resources and full text compliance leader, Elon Musk, our humility coach, and George Santos, our truth mentor. So thank you all very, very much. And we're going to go right into a virtual happy hour where you'll be connected for a 5-minute video chat and maybe with the amazing Lorraine Smith. So thank you all. And then we'll come back. All right. So we're going to go get started right now. So Lorraine, you're brilliant, and thank you. And thanks for sending me the stuff. I'll send it out to everybody who registered. So let's get the cocktail party going.
Thanks, Bobby, and thank you, everyone.